everybody, this is Hua. Welcome back to my storytelling YouTube channel. Happy New Year. I have been incredibly busy with putting all of the things that I have had to set aside and finishing up everything, and so I've been behind on storytelling. But I'm excited to share that I am back. This is one of the stories that came to me at the strike of midnight. Cold coffee, a little bit of chocolate, and here is born a story called The Domineering CEO. Rylee and Erick grew up together as neighbors and helped each other with the family farms. But as they got older, Erick falls deeper and deeper in love with her. And yet for Rylee, Erick has always been the brother she never had. When life changes and the wind brings CEO Theseus into her life, everything goes from normal to blazing crazy. The two men find themselves at war with trying to win over Rylee, and for her, she would have to make a decision on who would be the true hero and hold a place in her heart. So I invite you to take a moment to sit back, relax, and enjoy with me.
We were crazy in love, careless and young, but I wouldn't change it. You had me right from the start, you gave me your all, but something changed, yeah. And I sometimes drive you crazy. Yeah, I sometimes drive you crazy. And I think that's why you've been building up this wall now, and I don't really know how I'm supposed to break it down. I tried peeking through the cracks, saw the light but couldn't catch it. Now the one is breaking down. You should let me love you. You're making it so.
Mom, I'm heading out. I'll be back before dinner. Rylee Chang slipped on the pair of tennis shoes and hurried out the door, where her longtime childhood friend and neighbor, Erick Wong, was waiting on a motorcycle. He was a handsome, rugged country boy that had arms of strong muscles and a voice that was like velvet. His black hair was always a bit ruffled, and one strand fell over his eye constantly. Her favorite part was when she would reach out to brush it back, and the smile he gave her was incredibly warming to her heart and soul. The two had grown up together as neighbors on the farm their families owned, and been friends through everything. Erick was 2 years older than she was, and everything she couldn't do, he would do it for her. At times, many thought they would become romantically involved, and although the world knitted them together, Rylee always felt he was more of a big brother to her. "Come on, we're going to be late," Erick cried as he handed her the helmet. She put it on and jumped behind him, putting her arms around him, hugging him. He revved the engine, and they were off, heading toward the road. The street was quiet for this time of the hour, which was odd as people were coming home from work. Erick soon drove to the highway leading to downtown, and the summer wind welcomed them both. The motor engine was loud, so she kept to herself, knowing he had a surprise for her, and was excited to see what he had planned. Getting to Friday was a long, terrible wait, and farming in the fields was worse because she couldn't focus. She'd been occupied with Erick's request of taking her somewhere special for the weekend. She hadn't been to downtown in a long while, and life working the farm took over her time. They stopped at a red light, and Erick steadied the motorcycle. "I'm anxious to know where we're going," she said. He slightly turned to her and gave her a chuckle. "Curious little monkey, are you? You'll see soon enough." The light turned green, and he drove again, crossing the street, and as they got into downtown, it began to get busy. She rarely visited Minneapolis, only because she wasn't a good driver, and she was afraid of all the traffic that seemed to come at her with a speed she couldn't control. She lived most of her life in Princeton and was surrounded by cows and chickens. She knew that life, preferred that over the smell of exhaust from cars. As they pulled through the highway just past the Lowry Tunnel, Erick took a quick left and into the parking lot. Once he got the motorcycle into a spot, he turned the engine off and removed his helmet. She let go of him to remove hers and got off the seat. Handing the helmet to him, she looked at where they were. "Oh my, this is beautiful. I've seen this on postcards at the post office, but never in person. How'd you guess I wanted to be here? Rylee asked. Erick winked and opened the small trunk to place the 2 helmets away. I am an excellent mind reader. As she turned to face the many statues near them, a sleek black Lincoln drove past her, and Erick yelled for her to caution. She turned around too late, and the car came to a screeching halt. Out of breath from fear of almost being hit, Erick reached for her and pulled her toward him. Where the hell are your eyes? Can't you see she's walking here? Erick cried. The door opened, and a man in a black uniform got out, clearly looking like a driver instead of the owner of the vehicle. I am deeply sorry, ma'am. Are you all right? He asked. You need to watch where you're going, Rylee said, as Erick pulled her toward the motorcycle. The windows were tinted, and she couldn't see who was sitting in the back. She was sure he was able to see her clearly. She made a daring and bold gaze at the back passenger windows. You should hire a safer driver, she called out. Erick shook his head as the driver apologized once again and got back in, driving the car away. Jesus, ridiculous, Erick said as he took her hand, and the two walked toward the garden of statues. Rylee tucked a strand of her short black hair behind her ear, and her heart lit up when she saw the swing. She let go of Erick's hand and rushed over, hopping on. He laughed as he came by and began pushing her. This is beautiful, Erick. Thank you for bringing me here, she said. You're welcome, my lovely lady. Where do you want to go for dinner? I promised my mother I'd be home for dinner. Ah, come on. Give me something to look forward to this evening. Rylee made a face. Erick, I'm already spending the day with you. Besides, tomorrow I have a job interview and I have to prepare myself for it. What job is this? He asked. She thought there was a hint of jealousy that rose in his tone, but she ignored it. Not too far from home, but it's a caretaker position. Laughing, Erick replied, Caretaker? Are you qualified? She turned around and made a face. How dare you, Erick Wong? I am more than qualified, and you know it. Don't you even try your moves on me. I know exactly what I applied for. He stopped the swing and gave her a soft gaze. Up close, he truly was really handsome. She'd seen him through all stages of growing up, from geeky boy to full-blown handsome man. He smiled at her and then reached out to touch her cheek gently. Tell me about the job, he said. It's a grandma. She's getting old and needs someone to help take care of her. Her son and grandson run this very busy company and no one's around to help her. She isn't to the point where she's immobile. She just needs help every now and then. And the pay is good. Handsomely well, in fact. It will help pay for the times when we finish harvesting the crop and have nothing to do. Erick made a face. So when will I even get to see you then? With the farm and now with work, you'll be gone all day. This might be the last time we get to hang out like this together. Oh gosh, Erick, you big baby, she cried. Why are you moping around with this? You are the first person I think of when I wake up to share all my thoughts with, and that will never change. You and I are like 2 peas in a pod. You are the big brother I never had, and no matter what happens, I will always return to you. He gave her a soft smile. I'm going to hold you onto your promise. If you don't do as you say, I will be the first to whip your bottom. It wasn't until the sun set that Erick dropped her off, and she saw her mother sitting on the front porch knitting a blanket. Her mother, Nadine Chang, was in her early 50s, still as beautiful like her wedding photo, and a heart of gold. She spoke soft, but if you upset her, she had a new woman in town that scared you to the core. She'd married her father at the age of 20 and had her a year later. After having Rylee, her mother suffered multiple miscarriages, and the two stopped trying for more. Rylee grew up without siblings, but leaned on Erick and her mother for love and support. I thought you said you would be home by dinner, Nadine said as she looked up from her knitting. Dinner was 2 hours ago, dear. Smiling, Rylee came to kneel down before her mother and put her hands on hers. Sorry, Mama, Erick took me out to eat. Of course he did. Are you all ready for the interview tomorrow? I am going to go and look things over and then head to bed. You do that. Are you coming up soon? Nodding, her mother replied, "Your father is out in the field. I'll wait for him to return, then we'll come up together. Go on in." Rylee entered the house and walked up the stairs to her room, where she showered and settled on the bed. Looking over the information packet she'd received earlier this week, she double-checked what she'd filled in to make sure everything was correct. So far, what she knew was that this woman wasn't just any woman. She was fully loaded, as in rich, and could afford anything. But her health was failing her, and her son wanted someone to help his mother around the house. Him and his son ran a business that required them to be away from home a lot, and no one was around to give his aging mother a hand. She looked at the name. Rylee Vang. Rylee Vang. How interesting. I will see you tomorrow. The sound of coffee trickling caught the attention of Theseus as he came down the spiral staircase to the living room. He finished buttoning his cuff link and took the jacket over his arm to slip on. He could smell the roasted beans in the air along with what was a blueberry bagel. He rounded the corner and saw his grandma, Rylee, standing in the kitchen wearing all white as she stirred her cup. "Grandma," he said as he walked in, "why are you up so early?" She turned around, a spectacle on her nose and her gray strands up in a bun. "Why are you up so early?" "I'm up early to make money." "And so am I." "You're so vicious, Grandma." She smiled and handed the cup to him. "Don't get me started. Drink that. Where's your father?" "You taught him well. He's already at the office and I'm late." "Well, then you didn't learn good then." "You're joking, right?" he asked as he took the cup from her and sipped. "Just perfect." Smiling, Rylee asked, "When do you leave to Japan?" "In 2 days. And I'm worried about you." "Don't be. Your father has set up a few young gals to come meet me today for the position of my caretaker while you both are away." Theseus made a face as he set the coffee cup down and crossed his arms. "A caretaker? Do I trust a total stranger in this house with you alone?" "I'm not alone. I've got eagle eyes everywhere in this home." Laughing, Theseus replied, "If you are referring to the cameras, I should know. I set them up. But make sure you ask all the hard questions. I need to know you're safe with whoever you decide to go with. In fact, give me their resumes. I'd like to look them over before I leave for the office." "It's right over there." He turned and saw the pile of folders on the dining table. He walked over and flipped through them, and then suddenly his hand stopped on the last folder. His heart raced, and he looked at the information. Rylee Cheng. "Huh." He smirked, and he saw that she was actually the first one to come. "Grandma, do you mind if I hang around to ask some questions?" It didn't take long before the one called Rylee Cheng arrived. She was a cute girl with short black hair to her chin and wore an oversized sweater with a skirt. She had a bright and cheery smile that caught his attention. His grandma had answered the door and brought her to the dining room where they were sitting together. He was watching from his office through the security cameras. "Rylee, such an interesting name you have," his grandma started. "Tell me about yourself." "Thank you. I live on a farm with my parents, and when we're not harvesting, we make our own jam and butter to sell. We've been in the family farm business for over 30 years. I am a very at-home kind of girl, and I don't venture much to the big world. I like traditional dishes, and I can cook them well." Theseus smiled as she continued talking about her background and obtaining a certificate in personal care assistance. She'd taken care of several elderly neighbors from time to time and had an impressive background in terminology and healthcare. She'd also been an interpreter at one point, but the scheduling had been inconsistent, causing her to stop working. "Wow," his grandma beamed. "You sound so mature for your age." "Well, like I mentioned, my son and grandson are very busy and run the family business. Sometimes they are away for weeks at a time in another country to manage affairs. As I am getting older, my eyesight and health are failing, and I need someone to help me around the home. I can still do a lot of things, but I'm stubborn, and I pretend to be fine when I'm hurting. With my 2 boys being away, I would like someone to be around to help me when I need it." "I'd love to be considered," she said with a smile. You sound like the perfect person. Before I make a decision, I do have a few candidates to go through, but I'd like to introduce you to my grandson. He's here. When he heard his grandma call his name, he stood and walked into the room. He saw immediately the effect he had on her as her cheeks suddenly turned a bright red and she swallowed hard. When she stood up to shake his hand, she tripped and fell forward into his arms. Embarrassed, she shoved away and cleared her throat, extending her hand. Hello, I'm Rylee Chang. He took her hand and smiled. Rylee Chang, nice to meet you. I'm Theseus Vang. Theseus, she said, trying his name. Nice to meet you. She removed her hand and returned to sit down. Grandma, may I have a moment with you? He asked. Sure. Excuse me. The two walked to his office, where he closed the door and turned around to find her smiling. He knew that smile, and when he crossed his arms, she laughed out loud. Don't you dare give me that look, Theseus. I know what you have in your mind, and no, you cannot pursue her if she's going to work for me. He laughed. Grandma, it was never in my thoughts to pursue her at all. Have you looked at the woman I date? Nodding, she replied, That's why I was afraid. Not one of them looks like her, and you look bored. I like her as an employee, Grandma. I meant to get you here alone to share that with you. Hire her. His grandma smiled and tapped his shoulder. I have eyes, young man. I know the difference, and I've lived a lot longer than you. Do not argue with me. He put his hands up in surrender. I'm not arguing, Grandma. I'm saying that I agree with her as a hired help. That's all. I'm going to leave now. Theseus gathered his briefcase as she gave him another glare, and he hurried to the garage where his driver, Stan, was ready to take him to work. As he got in, he noticed that there was a bike perched up nicely against the front door. Has she ridden in on a bike here? He smiled and directed Stan to take him to the office. The family ran a business of signing contracts to send some of the top leaders to close deals for multi-million-dollar corporates. His grandfather, Leonard, started it way before and handed it down to his father. Now the two of them ran it together. When his mother got sick, his father had taken time off to care for her, and when she passed, he picked up his role as acting CEO again and voted in a new board to help him run the company. Now, as he was nearing retirement age, he was pushing Theseus to take over. Their company was located in downtown, and his office overlooked the entire Mississippi River. As he walked in, the employees all greeted him with a smile, and he nodded as he made his way to his office, where his secretary and assistant, Jennifer View, was busy talking on her headpiece. She smiled at him and handed him a few messages as he made his way in. But as he set his things on the desk, he heard someone clearing their throat, and he spun around to meet none other than his ex-girlfriend, Della Song, sitting cross-legged on his black love seat wearing a very provocative red dress. Her long black hair was sleek and smooth down her back, and she wore multiple rings on her fingers that were painted pink. Took you long enough to get here? Do you know how long I've been waiting? Della asked. What are you doing here? She ignored his question. 2 damn cups of coffee, Theseus, that's how long. He turned back to his messages and began flipping through them. How'd you get in here? I shall have to talk to security. Jennifer barged in suddenly, and her face was flushed. Mr. Vang, I was clear on her not being here, but she forced her way in and even threatened me. I'm so sorry. Della stood up and glared at her. Your job is to answer phones. Jennifer blushed and turned to go when Theseus put his notes down and called her name. She turned around and he glared at Della. Jennifer, if this woman returns again and I'm not here, you have my full permission to call the authorities to remove her from the premises. And Della, if you ever come back here and threaten my staff, I will send you where you cannot get your nails filled every 2 weeks. Jennifer smiled and nodded. Yes, sir. She left, and Della made a face as she walked forward and crossed her arms. He had no clue as to why he had been attracted to her once. Perhaps he was bored, as his grandma had said. Right now, Della looked anything but attractive. Theseus, You can't ignore me forever, she said. Sure I can. I've been doing it quite well, in fact. What makes you think I've been wondering about your well-being at all? Her bottom lip quivered and she threw up her hands. I'm speechless. No, you're rude. Speechless is when you're quiet as a mouse. You're making a ruckus in my office where I work and it's not invited. Now get out of here. Some of us have to make a living unlike those who bleed others dry. Her face turned red and she walked toward him, anger shooting through her eyeballs at him. You were begging me to return to you weeks ago. Nodding, he replied, That's right. Weeks ago. I had a few moments to rethink everything, and now that I've come to a clear mind, I don't want you back. Ever. I'm the best thing in your life. Wrong, he shouted as he straightened and moved toward her, forcing her to back up. I was the best thing in your life. And now without my money, you are currently wondering how you will live the high life. You lied, you cheated, and you stole money from me. I was so blinded by the cheap perfume and the plastic body you presented that I forgot who I was. Perhaps you thought since every man you ever fooled came crawling to you on their knees, I'd do the same thing, so you decided to play your tricks on me. But Della, you forgot that I'm nothing like the men you know. I was the best you'll ever have. Tears shimmered in her eyes as she let out a silent sob. She quickly grabbed her purse and rushed out of the room where she heard Jennifer bidding her a goodbye. Taking a deep breath, he came to pick up his notes on the desk again. What a start to his day. Interesting was nowhere near how to describe it. Erick dropped the toolbar into the box and took his hat off, raking his hand through his strands. Goddamn car, he thought. It had died on him again, and he was fed up with it. He tossed his hat to the side and picked up the bottle of Coke to drink when he saw her riding her bike down the dirt path. The wind had picked up and was blowing across her yellow dress, causing the hem to lift, exposing her slender legs. Her smile was bright, and her eyes were full of excitement as she cried out his name. Erick put the bottle of drink down and wiped his hands as she closed the distance and tossed her bike aside. She screamed out his name and ran into his arms where he picked her up, and she wrapped her hands around his neck. Her jasmine fragrance sent tingling vibrations down his back as she hugged him close and screamed. I got the job, she cried as she pulled away and did a little victory dance. I got the job. He smiled and leaned against the car, crossing his arms. Here I thought you'd won the dang lottery, girl. What? She asked, flushed and a little stunned at his reaction. Erick, come on. Can't you just pretend to smile and gift me some hand-picked flowers or something? I'm so excited. I got the job. And she didn't even interview anyone else. She just plucked me right away and asked when I could start. He laughed and raised an eyebrow. You're that good, huh? I'm the best, she cried, shooting one fist into the air in a winning mode. Come on, we have to celebrate. I start tomorrow, and that means the last time together. Take me out to eat at a fancy place. Fancy place? The fanciest place I know of is the buffet down the street where their dishes are clean and there's no cockroaches in the kitchen. Rylee made a face, and she put her hands on her cheeks. Erick, take me somewhere where the waiter comes to take my order? Please? She blinked her eyes fast and tilted her head, giving him the puppy eye look. It melted his heart when she did that, and she knew it too. God dang it, woman, you're gonna kill me. The restaurant was busy as the two of them made their way to sit down at the corner table. He couldn't think of anything besides Perkins, and as they were seated, he noticed a table of men glaring at them. One of them had a smile on his face as his eyes connected to Rylee. Jealousy raged in his heart as he handed her a menu. Oblivious to what was around her, Rylee opened up the menu and began looking around for what she would eat. A pretty blonde came up wearing the name tag Amber and handed them 2 glasses of water. Hello, I'm Amber and I'll be serving you tonight. Is there any drinks I can bring out for you while you look over the menu? She asked with a sweet voice. Rylee looked up and smiled. Yes, I'll have a strawberry lemonade, please. A Coke for me, Erick replied. She smiled at them both and left, and his eyes gazed back at the table of men, whose eyes were still staring at the direction of Rylee. He cleared his throat and picked up his menu. "What will you have?" Rylee asked. "Probably a steak," he answered as he glanced over the many options. He looked at her over the top of his menu. "How about you?" Shrugging, she bit her lower lip in frustration. "Gosh, there's so much to pick from. Breakfast sounds really good right now. Look at those pancakes." Amber returned with their drinks and set them down as she pulled out a pen and notepad. "Are you ready to order?" Rylee looked up with a sweet smile. "How is the pancakes here?" "Oh, they're the best," Amber replied. "And I'm not saying that just because I work here. I love it. Our cook here is amazing." "Wow, okay. I'll do some of that with scrambled eggs and hash brown. Can I also add a cup of fruit?" "Sure," Amber said as she jotted it down, and then she turned around. "And for you, sir?" "A steak with baked potato, medium rare, and if I can get some steak sauce on the side." Nodding, she noted it down and picked up their menus. "Be right back with those orders for you." As she turned to go, Erick saw that the men got up from the table and went to pay. He let out a breath of relief as he turned his attention back to her. Rylee was sipping on her lemonade and smiling with her straw in her lips. "What time do you start tomorrow?" he asked. She set her drink down and wiped her mouth with a napkin. "She needs me there at 7, since she's an early riser. Their house is huge, Erick, and it's like a maze. When she took me for a tour, I even got lost trying to figure my way out of the house." "Who will drop you off? Your father still needs a car, doesn't he?" Nodding, she replied, "They don't live that far from us, about a good 5 miles only, and I rode my bike there." "You can't always ride your bike there. What if it rains?" She smiled sweetly and took his hands. "Then I guess you'll have to drop me off." He laughed and yanked his hand away, as if. As she smirked and took another sip from her drink, he made a mental note to wake up early enough to send her to work every day. As the waitress brought their food to them, he watched as her eyes grew big at the size of the pancakes. Laughing, he had more joy watching her eat than the steak on his own plate. The truth was, Erick had been in love with this girl all his life. There was no one else on earth who would ever measure up to her. He didn't have the courage to share his true feelings for her, because every word that dripped from her lips called him the best friend she had ever had. Inside that little world of hers, he was the brother she wished she had, and the protector of a man she could turn to without fear. But the love he wanted her to give to him was absent. She never saw him more than someone who she could rely on. His father had been questioning why he wasn't dating, and his mother had been worried. But the truth was, the girl he'd grown up with down the street was the only woman he wanted to have. And yet, she never saw him more than just a friend. How do you tell someone you love with all your heart and soul that you were the one man she was looking for? How do you tell that to someone whose heart keeps you at a distance? Thank you for tuning in. Chapter 2 will be out shortly.
We were crazy in love, careless and young, but I wouldn't change it. You had me right from the start, you gave me your all, but something changed, yeah. And I sometimes drive you crazy. Yeah, I know, I sometimes drive you crazy. And I think that's why you've been building up this wall now, and I don't really know how I'm supposed to break it down. I tried peeking through the cracks all